think it's fair to say in the last couple of years, DreamWorks has not been able to put the butts in seats like they used to. Back when I was a kid, DreamWorks was a studio that was held in really high esteem and churned out a bunch of big name franchises. For many of those years, it was well and truly a juggernaut, and I think arguments could easily be made to say that it was neck and neck with Pixar as the biggest studio of the 2000s decade. I think that a big part of that was that they were making high quality films that were in tune with the audience tastes at the time, but another aspect that doesn't get enough attention is how deeply and richly layered a bunch of their characters have been over the years. It makes them really compelling and memorable. Of course, there's the OG Shrek, and previously on this channel we've talked about the likes of Hiccup and Gobber from How to Train Your Dragon. I feel like Hiccup was one of the best written, most compelling and relatable protagonists in animation history, let alone DreamWorks history, and I felt that Gobber was just a deeply underrated character who has a lot more depth than just being comic relief. So today I want to stick with the How to Train Your Dragon theme because it's a really awesome franchise, and talk about another masterclass of writing in the character of Stoic the Vast, who is actually one of the best written characters in the entire franchise, and perhaps all of DreamWorks. Hyperbole? Perhaps a little bit, but that's half the fun in making this sort of thing. Taking my wild, exaggerated opinions and trying to convince you it's objective truth. Okay, so Stoic, I think, is best viewed in the order that you see him in the films, because it doesn't expose his entire backstory at once, and thus allows you to slowly peel back the layers of his characterization. This means we gotta start with How to Train Your Dragon, the original animated film. None of the flashbacks we saw that helped flesh him out over the course of the second movie before his death either. When we first meet Stoic during the battle against the dragons attacking Berk right at the start of the film, he's presented as everything a Viking should ever aspire to be. He's strong and brave, a bold, imposing warrior, and of course, a huge slab of beef. This serves as a perfect contrast to his son Hiccup, who is everything that Stoic's not, despite wishing that he was different and could fit in more. And all of this causes tensions between them, where Stoic's overly harsh on his son and doesn't make him know how much he loves him and cares for him. That being said, the film makes it clear that whilst they're struggling to connect as father and son, they do actually care about each other. You can see that by their actions. Hiccup's very desperate to fit in, and in particular to earn his father's approval, which he thinks he needs to kill a dragon to do, kicking off the plot of the movie. Meanwhile, in that opening sequence of the film, Stoic continually goes out of his way to protect Hiccup from getting himself killed by various rampaging dragons. So at the very least, we know that he doesn't want him dead. Regardless though, in this early part of the movie, we as the audience are positioned to side with Hiccup and identify with his struggles because he's the main protagonist. And so by that token, we're also positioned to not really give Stoic the benefit of the doubt. At first, to us he's just some big meathead who mistreats his son and doesn't care about him beyond ensuring he's still alive at the end of the day. There's no warmth and there's no pride in their interactions. Therefore, he's positioned as an antagonist, but not a villain, which I found to be very compelling. It would have been so easy for the writers to simply leave him as he is from this point onwards, and have him be this boorish oaf who thinks he knows best, and always bulldozes his son with quite literally no care at all. And I will admit, for a good portion of this film, they do this. He has a meeting with the clan where he blackmails them into sailing out to hunt for the dragon's nest by saying that anybody who refuses has to stay behind to look after Hiccup. This then leads to everybody volunteering without hesitation. And so here we have Stoic playing up the idea that his son is a disgrace, and that no normal person wants to spend any sort of time with him. They would quite literally prefer to take their chances fighting actual dragons that could kill or maim them with an errant sneeze than spend time with this boy. So it's not exactly showcasing his excellent paternal instincts at this stage of the game. He goes on to rant at Gobber about all his issues with Hiccup, with the implication being that his son's kind of useless. And it's actually Gobber that suggests that they should let Hiccup participate in dragon fight training like he always wanted to, because it might end up being good for him. Stoic then goes off on his adventure and he vanishes from the narrative for a time, so it all falls to Gobber to be the paternal figure in Hiccup's life throughout these stages of the movie. When he returns from his failed hunt, he arrives to find Berk a very different place than when he left it. Suddenly, his wimpy, dorky, useless son has become a somebody. Everybody's talking about him, but now it's in a good way, isn't it? And why is this the case? Because he's a dragon fighting prodigy. He's getting it done in the ring and he seems to know what to do against any type of dragon. Now that he's all popular and cool at last, Stoic finally has something to bond with him over. Has he ever spent time trying to engage with him as a person and discover what his interests are? No, that's not happening. It's only good if he values the things that I value and is talented and popular too. We need to talk about the things that I like, or otherwise there's nothing to say. So obviously he doesn't come across well at all here. However, the way he's written across these scenes is also really funny, and that serves to make him more likable. When he returns from the raid on the dragon nest, the first thing he does is ask about the changes on the island, and all anybody can seem to talk about is Hiccup and how things have changed since he left. Here, he assumes that everybody is actually just legitimately celebrating because his son is dead, and he is not happy. He's really cut up for a second until he realizes that in actuality, everybody's celebrating that his son's finally become the Viking they wanted him to be. So then he tries to have that conversation with him. He gives him his mum's breastplate as a helmet to match Stoic's in one of the funniest, most awkward scenes in the entire franchise. And so suddenly, here we have him obviously positioned as an antagonist and not as the best dad in the world. And yet even with the audience positioned to really identify with and support Hiccup, you can't help but like Stoic regardless, which I think is really good writing. It makes him feel far more three-dimensional than otherwise. otherwise. It would have been so easy to write him as a classic generic asshole dad who won't listen to his son and is overly toxic. But by softening him a lot more and showing the warmth and goofiness underneath that iron exterior, it makes him seem more likable and helps to sell the redemption arc he goes through at the end of the movie. If you didn't have these moments already, I think it would have felt more forced and somewhat out of character. We then come to the big blow up in their relationship. Proud of Hiccup's success, he goes to see him slay a dragon in the ring as part of the reward for being top of his class. However, he notices that instead of killing the dragon or even fighting it, Hiccup's trying to somehow tame it. This goes against everything Stoic knows and he demands the fight be stopped, which in turn frightens the dragon and ends up putting Hiccup in danger. His screams attract Toothless, who bursts into the arena to save him before he in turn is subdued and captured by the Vikings. This is where Stoic hits rock bottom in terms of his overall characterization and his role within the story. Once he discovers that Toothless knows the way to the dragon's nest, he straps him on a ship, bulldozes Hiccup, and disowns him as his son. However, even here, in what is his most hateable moment, they plant those seeds of redemption. Once again, very easy to simply have him stomp off all furious after having disowned his son, with no intention of ever wanting to reconcile. However, the writing shows nuance again by having him stop and take a beat. He looks sad and regretful and almost moves to go back and talk to his son, but in the end he sticks with his convictions and goes off on the dragon hunt. Then you finally come to the redemption, where you see these positive qualities that Stoic has really starting to shine through. When the Red Death reveals itself, it very quickly becomes clear that it's game over for Stoic and the rest of the Vikings from Berk. This dragon is way too big and way too strong. They can't kill it. As their leader, Stoic orders that they flee to hide on the other side of the island, whilst he stays behind to fight the Red Death and buy them as much time as he can. He has the full expectation that he's going to die, and surely he knows that he has absolutely no hope in hell, but he does this anyway. Bravery and loyalty well and truly begin to define his character. When Hiccup flies in, he realizes that he was completely wrong, that Hiccup wasn't weak or pathetic or any of those things, that in his own way, he was a brave Viking and a credit to Berk. He saves his son from drowning and then saves Toothless as well, before telling Hiccup just as he's mounting up to fight the Red Death that he doesn't even have to do this. He doesn't have to go and fight a dragon. He doesn't have to kill one. It shows that he finally understands the type of Viking that Hiccup wants to be and the type of person they should aspire to be. One that doesn't rush in to try to solve everything with violence. He rejects the dogma he was raised with and tried to inflict on his son. He apologizes comprehensively, he takes back his words spoken in anger, and declares his pride in Hiccup's accomplishments. When he thinks Hiccup's been killed in the course of the battle, his grief is very genuine. None of this newfound emotion felt out of place in the story because they'd slowly sprinkled it in underneath the surface the entire time, hinting at the reality of who Stoic could be if you remove the toxic elements of his cultural upbringing from his beliefs. He then accepts Hiccup's new way of thinking and their society begins to shift rapidly. Like I said, whilst he was an antagonist for much of the film, it doesn't mean he was the villain, and so this allowed them to craft this really compelling narrative of growth and forgiveness, of realizing that parents aren't always right, and they often have things to learn from their own kids who will have a different worldview and perspective. Honestly, even as a standalone film, I think this would largely be the perfect character arc. He has the full Shrek 1 experience, where the character seems surly and cut off, but over time due to love, whether it's romantic or in this case paternal, they learn to change and grow and become a fan favorite as a result, with a really powerful message sent through their story. Like I said, if they never made a second film, I would still think that Stoic's among their best written characters for his arc and role across this first film. However, then they made the second movie, and it just becomes even more perfect. Not just his individual character and moments, but the impact that his role has on the wider storytelling and the arcs of the characters around him. For starters, the Stoic we meet at the start of How to Train Your Dragon 2 is completely different to how he behaves over the course of the first movie. Here, he's in proud papa mode, and he's largely collaborative with Hiccup while still being somewhat overprotective. It helps to showcase the passage of time and reaffirm the ending of the original movie. He's much more jovial and kind while still having that overprotective streak, and this knowledge that he's still overprotective, combined with the full retelling of what happened to Volker, creates a more full picture, an explanation for why Stoic was the way he was in that first movie, why he treated Hiccup the way he did. It wasn't because he thought he was weak or pathetic or whatever. He could simply see that Hiccup was not made to be a traditional Viking, and so he was so deeply worried he'd lose him. It adds to the picture that's been painted and retroactively strengthens the story of the first movie, because when does Stoic get the most angry? It's when he feels that Hiccup's in danger of being hurt. It also enhances why he lashed out at Hiccup and disowned him for befriending a dragon. He'd lost his beloved wife to one, and this could almost be taken as Hiccup choosing dragons over her. And so the sequel allows you to get a richer understanding of how he behaves as a character and why he makes certain decisions or says certain things. However, this time the way he goes up against Hiccup shifts. In the time gap, Hiccup's become a pretty big deal, and he thinks that he alone is capable of stopping violence and causing people to change their perspectives. After all, for Hiccup, if he can make his dad have a change of heart, nobody's a challenge. Thus, you have this really interesting role reversal, where Stoic gets to play the role of father imparting wisdom to a son who's not going to listen, when he tries to tell him that men like Drago can't be reasoned with. Violence is all they know and all they understand. Then he meets Volker again, and instead of being angry, he's just happy to have his family back. Once again, it's clever writing because because it gets you feeling warm and fuzzy towards Stoic. Even at this point on the first watch, I wasn't expecting him to die. Yeah, the dead dad / mental thing can be a bit of a trope, but I just didn't see it coming. So the story builds him up all across the movie to be so lovable, only to have him die saving Hiccup in the big penultimate confrontation. Suddenly, the narrative has this huge empty space, and you keenly feel the absence of the character even well into the third film, which is a good thing. His death helps to flesh out Hiccup's arc. It makes him realize that his father was right, and that not everybody can be reasoned with. Sometimes those hard choices have to be made, and that's what it means to be the chief, which Hiccup carries into the third film and helps to shape his own story. However, it also served to make what was a fairly minor villain with not much screen time or interaction with the protagonists into a hateable piece of shit that you need to see die, elevating Drago into becoming the best antagonist of the franchise, alongside Stoic himself from the first film, as well as the best outright villain. Without Stoic's death and the writing that had made him so important to the narrative prior to that moment, so many of the important character arcs we saw play out would not have hit the same. Plus, he got to die having reunited with his wife and saving his only son, so he went out like a Chad too. From this point onwards, he isn't really much of an active character in the story, and yet I think it's a huge testament to the role that he plays in the franchise that even without being there, he can create story. After all, for Hiccup, alongside Toothless and Astrid, Stoic was one of the characters most important to his personal arc. He was training him up to be chief by the time of the second movie, and so when he dies, now Hiccup has to step up, and the burning question on his mind is, what would Stoic do? In the third film, he flashes back to his dad talking about the hidden world, and this is what inspires Hiccup to begin with. It also further doubles down on the idea that Stoic became the way he was out of fear as Hiccup got older, and he realized that he wasn't a warrior. I mean, he's so gentle with him here when he's talking about the hidden world. It just continues to richly layer their rather beautiful relationship. Then you also have mentions from Grimmel, who knew him in his dragon killing days, and who claims that by becoming soft and passive, it led him to his death. So once again, Stoic from Beyond the Grave is able to enhance the storytelling and help showcase the ideological battle on display between Hiccup and Grimmel, and make Grimmel a little bit more interesting. Then there's Homecoming, which once again shows Stoic's impact in a really beautiful way, not just in Hiccup's life, but in Gobber's. I feel that somehow, along the way in the trilogy, it's not that Gobber stops mattering, but I think you kind of forget that he's probably the person that's closest to Stoic and to Hiccup across the years. When Stoic died, though, a lot of the focus was placed on Hiccup's story, and so here we get to see what life's been like for Gobber with his best friend being dead for many years. His absence inspires Gobber and Hiccup to pick up old traditions as a way to honor their history and his legacy, and it's just nice and wholesome, and I think it helps to further humanize Gobber outside of him being a comic relief character in general and a mentor to Hiccup. So Stoic's last act is helping to flesh out his best buddy storyline. What a legend! Really, I don't think it can be understated just how well written his character was across the trilogy of films. He served the story perfectly in all his roles and is consistently one of the best characters to watch with lots of comedy and pathos on offer. He is without a doubt one of the best written characters in all of animation, or at least that's my opinion, but now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the writing around Stoic the Vast? Do you think I'm on the money, or am I glazing him a little bit too much? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe and let me know.